Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National At-Home Dad Network's monthly webinar series. Here we are with our second webinar of 2022 for February. We've got David Stanley with us today. David is an author, a poet, a blogger, an influencer, and also he narrates audiobooks, which I find absolutely fascinating. As a parent, I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I can have an earphone in while I'm doing things around the house and keeping up with the kids, and it lets me get to, read the books that I want to read. But I find it fascinating that he's actually narrating these, and it occurred to me that most parents, we're all spending a whole lot of time reading bedtime stories and, books to our kids, and the idea of being able to do it and maybe even get paid for it is really attractive to me. I can't speak for anybody else. But without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to David and let him take things off from here.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I'm always happy to kind of spread the gospel of this particular side hustle. I mean, I know there are people out there who are doing it, 6 hours a day of time in the studio and a couple hours a day of pitching and all of that. But that's not really the focus of this. And it wasn't my focus either. A lot like what you said early in your introduction, that's kind of how I got interested in this. When my son was little, and he's now 29, he would spend 3, 4, 5 days with my folks, which was quite thankful for giving my first wife, his mom, and I a nice break. And I started recording his favorite books on cassette tapes, which gives you an idea of, when all this got started. And then I really didn't do anything with it. I have all these cassette tapes of me reading books for him that he could listen to in the car with my parents on road trips and whatever. And when I was a teacher, I taught high school science for almost 20 years. That was the introduction really of mic'd up amplified teachers. I taught science. I had a big lab. It was really boomy in there, and 30 kids. And I had one of the very first, it was a neck microphone, and I'd fool around and I'd do like the pharmaceutical disclaimers for the kids that we hear. And they would just die laughing. And it was fun for me. And it was a great engagement tool to get the kids on my side. And a year or two after I started teaching, my wife saw this thing, and I'm telling her these stories about how the kids, oh yeah, I just did this thing. And my wife saw this ad in the local township newspaper that said, hey, voiceover seminar tonight, 3 hours, $20 or whatever. I went and I did it. And a couple of the people in there were, just there for curiosity's sake. And I went in thinking, I've been told I have a good voice. I should probably pay a lot of attention. And the woman who was in there said, you really have some potential here. Get in touch with this guy. And it was an engineer of a really high-end audio studio that's out in the middle of nowhere, where all kinds of top recording professionals work. And I went out and I did a couple audition clips, 30-second auditions with Marshall Block's help. He runs this studio. It's called Reel to Reel. And he said, yeah, I think you can probably sell your voice. I think you can probably do something with this. And so I started doing voiceover. And I still do some, but the lion's share of my work, it kind of just segued into audiobook narration. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe because I'm a writer and I'm a reader as well. And it just seemed like a natural. And as my students in my family have told me, I'm always the storyteller. And a lot like you, we're always telling stories. So it's a good opportunity to maybe make a couple bucks and create a little bit of a legacy piece for yourself too. Because, at this stage of my life, legacy becomes a little bit important. You want to leave stuff behind. And I got a long way before I'm going to die, hopefully. But still, you do tend to think about that. So just to give you an idea, I've done, I think I'm at 42 or 44 books right now. I didn't look at my audible.com account before I logged in, but I've sold, I don't know, I want to say like 8,000 books total. And they range from young adult basketball hero books like The Real Allen Iverson to some very Not kidding. I was the voice of this young adult basketball series, which is cool because I like basketball. And I've done some very serious things. Book called the last of his years, which was drawing a blank. Is that right? The last of his days, the last of his years. Anyway, it was the guy who was the managing editor for the New York Times for many years, or no, excuse me, Life magazine for many years. And he, in his last year of his life, he became quite, he got hit really hard by Alzheimer's when he was like 90. And the book that I narrated was his son's book, who was also a professional writer, about helping his dad navigate the last year of his life. And it's sad and kind of joyful. And I mean, we're all gonna face that end piece. And the son wrote really, really well about it. And everything in between. I've done audio narrations for a guy, McGann Publishing. I'm like his house voice. Developed a relationship with Bill over the years, and he does a lot of bicycle racing and a lot of European bicycle touring, so I do all of his books that way. And he also has a series where we're doing great philosophers books. His series is called What's the Big Deal? Books That Matter. And so we've done Epictetus, and we've done several books of Plato's, and we've done some Seneca, I believe, and we've done we just came out with a new translated version of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's really, really good. And everybody's talking about Stoic philosophy these days. I mean, you go on Twitter and there's like 20 Stoic bots that as soon as they see the hashtag Stoic, it gets retweeted. So Stoic philosophy here in the pandemic is real. It's happening. And I should say, by the way, I get about 50 free downloads for for each audiobook that I do through the what's called ACX. That's the Audible/Amazon Creator Exchange. I'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So if you, Matt, or really anybody who's watching this or listening is interested, just go to my audible.com page, there's a listing of each book and a little sample. And if you're interested in any of the books that are there, for folks that are participating in this or listening to it, I'm happy to give them one of the free downloads. I've got plenty. They're there. They're there to use. Yeah, they're there to use, and we want to get as much of it out there. And then, of course, the hypothesis, and I say that word carefully, not theory. The hypothesis is they will leave a nice review in return for the free download, and they'll tell their friends. There's a little quid pro quo here for sure. That's part of being an influencer at any level. So, and I should say that, as I mentioned, I've sold, I think, I'm about halfway to 10, or I'm about 3/4 of the way to 10,000 books, and I've done 40 books over the last 10 years. As I mentioned, it's a side hustle.
Yeah.
I bring in anywhere from, depending on what people are reading, then anywhere from about $200 to $500 a month.
Okay.
It's an annuity, right?
Yeah.
Because my very first book was a tour guide to the Veneto region of Italy, and it doesn't, every once in a while, you can tell a bunch of people decide to go on a tour through the Veneto region and the Dolomites, and 9 of those books disappear in a day and a half. So it's kind of like that. So you really never know, but it's always, at this stage, it's like a minimum of about $200 a month. So, you spend the money. I take the cash.
It's not a huge amount of money, but it's nothing to shake a stick at either.
Right. And you do it part-time. And so it's
that was going to be my next question is, as somebody who listens to audiobooks, and again, I turned 50 earlier in the month. So in my mind, when I think about voiceovers, I always picture that recording studio with the person in the soundproof booth and the super fancy microphone and everything else. And the engineers mixing everything. And you're saying that that's not what happens these days?
Well, it does and it doesn't. I mean, for the majority of us who are doing audiobook narration, that's not what happens. When Neil Gaiman sits down to read one of his books, or when Barack Obama does his, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens. And but the average man, woman, non-binary folk, whoever it is that's doing the narration, we're almost all working from home studios. and some of them are very fancy. Some of them are very plain. I know a guy in New York who lives in a small apartment, and he has a what do you call it, a bifold medicine cabinet, and it's not in the wall. It's actually his booth, and when he opens it up, it's lined with sound, like 4 inches, 3, 4 inches of soundproof foam, and his mic sits right inside of that. And that's his booth because it gives him nice dead airspace. And if there's no construction going on outside, he says his apartment's very quiet. And that's where he does all of his work. And most of us are not talking into, $8,000 large diameter diaphragm microphones. Neumann microphones for $8,000 are nice, but it's not going to produce all that much better of a product than a $300 microphone. You really don't, because the dynamic range for the spoken word is much smaller than the dynamic range for a band and for singing. So you don't need that extraordinary super mic. I mean, they're really cool. And I got to tell you, when I do some work at Marshall Block's studio at Reel to Reel down in Fenton, I walk in there and I'm awestruck because it's that studio. I mean, Tom Petty, when he was alive, Tom married a woman from Fenton, Michigan, where Marshall's studio is. And no one knew this, but he always came back to Michigan on Thanksgiving for vacation with his wife's family. But being a musician, whenever he needed to, whenever the urge struck him, the muse, he had Marshall's studio on retainer for the holiday weekend. And he just paid Marshall, a big flat fee. And then when he came out, Marshall billed him for whatever he was working on for the hour by the hourly rate. And, so I walk in there and there's like Tom Petty pictures and Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad, and Mark Wahlberg actually did some stuff in there not long ago. And I mean, a ton of famous musicians. Dick Wagner, who was Alice Cooper and Lou Reed's guitar player, recorded all of his solo albums with Marshall. It's really, really cool to walk into a studio like that, but that's not my studio. I mean, I don't record anything like that. What I have done is in my basement, I have a drop ceiling because, of course, this house was built in the late 50s. And so beneath that drop ceiling, I framed out with a bunch of fiberglass ceiling tiles. So it like hangs below the drop ceiling. There's dead air in there. I framed out like about 6 by 8, I think, if memory serves. It might be 6. It's 6 by 10. And from those 6 by 10 ceiling tiles, I actually went to Goodwill or Salvation Army, and I bought a ton of quilts. And I mean that literally. Carrying those quilts down to the basement they weighed 150 pounds. And so I have 3 quilts deep that form my walls with dead airspace in between them. And when I get in the booth, it is utterly dead silent inside there. There's no echo. It's not soundproof. Like when my dog runs around up to here and I'm in the basement, I have to stop working until Josie decides she's done running around. But it's an incredible dead airspace. And I did not go out and buy a $1,200 microphone. I bought like a $300 microphone. And what I ended up doing to sort that out is I called Sweetwater. And if you talk to anybody in the music business, Sweetwater is the 900-pound gorilla, but they're really good at what they do. And I called them on the phone, and I use them for all my music stuff too. I called them on the phone. I said, I'm getting more involved. I had a blue snowball when I first started, but the dynamic range on that blue snowball was great for podcasting, but it wasn't really good for, like intimate kinds of solid, high-level audiobook narration. And they hooked me up with this like $350 microphone that was last year's model for like $250 or $200. And it's from a company called Becaster. And actually the guys who started up Blue Microphone left and started another company because that's what you do. And they that Becaster was their own. And here, let me grab these. And you'll also, of course, need a set of these really good ones. Don't buy $1,200 headphones, but do buy $200 headphones, $250 headphones. Your ears and your headphones are what you're going to be doing your work with, because of course you're going to be listening to yourself through your headphones when you're recording through your interface, and you're also, of course, going to be using these when you're mixing and doing all of your editing on your projects. And just a tip, really, I would seriously consider only buying closed back headphones. The open back headphones that let a lot of air in, which are really nice for listening to music because you get that big, airy, big room feel. I found, and this is kind of interesting, I don't know if anybody else in the business has, that I was getting bleed through from out of my headphones and back into my microphone. So every once in a while, I would get this really weird echo effect depending on where I held my head in relationship to the mic, because the sound was coming out the side of the headphones, and the mic, because it's a pretty high quality mic, was picking it up. I'm like, what the hell? It was making me crazy. And I was, like trying all kinds of computer solutions, and none of them worked until I finally figured out. I was like, oh, I'm just going to use some earbuds. One day I said, I record. Everybody listens to audiobooks with earbuds. I said, I'm going to listen to myself as I'm working with my earbuds. Turns out, no echo. Aha! Aha! And so I went in and I did a little bit of experimenting, some A/B testing. I put on the open back headphones that I used for music there, and I got real close to the mic, and there it was. The echo showed up right away. I was like,
And I think after the last 2 years of everybody being in Zoom meetings and distance learning for kids' school and everything else, we all know exactly what that echo sounds like.
yeah,
We have all heard it, and it drives everybody crazy.
If that's the headphone. I kind of forgot about that we're all in that boat for sure. So I should also mention software. Macs, I believe, still come preloaded. I'm not a Mac guy anymore. We used them at school when I was a teacher. They lent us MacBooks. I think they come preloaded with GarageBand still. Does anybody know? I don't, but they used to. Yeah.
So we're not an Apple family. We've always been PC and Android in our house. So
us too. And I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who was a video producer for the city of Rochester, Michigan for many years, and he's segueing into some other things. And he was telling me that he's doing a new podcast, and he was trying to do his podcast on GarageBand. He said trying to edit, and he's a pro. I mean, like for 30 years. And he said trying to edit audio for his podcast on GarageBand was just impossible. He said it was terrible. And so that's not my opinion. I don't have one, but I use Audacity. And that seems to be the common thread for a lot of folks who have, I believe they also have Audacity now for iOS too. But Audacity is intuitive. The website, their help center is, my experience, really good. My other experience with, YouTube and Audacity programs is not so great. I watched a couple of them. I was like, that's not very useful. Unless you get the Audacity labeled ones. There's a lot of people out there, of course, on YouTube that are posting their own how to use Audacity videos, is what I'm saying. And some of those are really not helpful at all. But the Audacity, official channel ones are also really useful. And Audacity's easy. You click file and it says open new file. It's okay. Click record, start talking. And then when you're done, there's a few steps that you need to go through in terms of creating the professional sound. You need to go in and manually eliminate all of your breaths and pops. I hate that sound. I take out almost all of the breaths that are in there. We
actually had somebody when I was initially promoting your appearance. Somebody had talked about the fact that they had always thought, they were listening to an audiobook one time, and the person narrating, they could hear them constantly breathing. And they were thinking to themselves, like, how horrible that was. And they were like, I could do better than that. And he said, it was really funny. I sat downstairs and I recorded myself reading, and I found out, no, I can't go more than about 20 seconds without making that loud breathing. So it's good to know that the trick is just editing that out.
Yep. Just take your mouse, put your cursor over the little breath. And we all do it subconsciously. It's a little at the beginning or end of nearly every phrase. And there's some tools in Audacity that will help you eliminate the big ones, but the little ones, I leave a couple in, but I take almost all of them. And that way you don't sound robotic.
Yeah, one of the people that we have watching is Joe Saladano.
Oh, hey, Joe, yeah. Nice to hear from you.
Joe just pointed out that he uses Audacity to edit his the Stay-at-Home Dad Beercast.
I love the Stay-at-Home Dad podcast, the Beercast. Those guys have such a great time. It's a lot. Listening to them is a lot of fun.
So,
Yeah, that's
it's not an uncommon piece of software. Now, I know one thing that sounds intimidating to a lot of people, including me, is just that, you've kind of rattled off a couple of things that, involve a pretty, not necessarily huge, but not an insubstantial financial commitment. Whether, it's a $200 or $300 microphone or, building yourself a little soundproof area. Is there a way that you can audition or like have somebody listen to determine, like, I would hate to have somebody go out and spend $400 on a microphone and then literally record one thing and have somebody say, you have the most annoying voice in the world. We have
well,
no interest. I mean,
yeah,
can you start off with less quality equipment and at least let
sure.
people get a feel for you?
Well, like my blue snowball, that was I think that was like a $70 microphone these days. As a musician as well, hawk shops, pawn shops always have gear. They're always, I mean, and if it says $120 on it for this $300 microphone, you say, hey, I got $80. The guy's going to go, deal. I mean, yeah, so there's a lot of that. And you really can do, I mean, I know guys who literally record in a closet in their home. They've just hung a couple blankets or one guy I know bought some foam from an upholstery shop. He bought a ton. He said, just here, save all your scraps for me for a couple days, and I'll come and get them. I'm building a little audio studio. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And he took in a couple pizzas and a case of beer.
Mm-hmm.
And he swapped out the pizzas and the case of beer for all of their
Trim.
all their foam, yeah, all their trim pieces, and he just glued them all. I mean, he created a wall of foam trim pieces, just like building a brick wall in a backyard. And he still uses it because it's still dead sound in there. So you really don't need to get really fancy. In fact, I would advise against it. Maybe you don't have time. Maybe it isn't as much fun as you thought it was. Maybe the reading part is really fun, but where you make your money is in the post-production, and that's tedious. As an aside, if I record for an hour, I have probably 90 minutes of work ahead of me, at least, maybe 2 hours of work in order to get it to professional quality sound. Because like I said, you got to go in, you got to edit out all of those little breath pops. If you have a lot of plosives, which no one likes hearing those in their audiobooks, the people who are good at it, they are able to edit them out through some software that you can download to the Audacity program. I've actually just kind of cut a lot of that out by going to 2 pop filters. I put one pop filter right in front of the other, just like this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's eliminated probably, I don't know, I'm going to say 90% of my plosive issues. And there are also, again, noise gates, they call them, which are exactly that. They're gates that cut out the noise that you can download that will help you eliminate those plosives too. We all do it. It's subconscious, but when you hear it, and not even subconscious, you kind of have to make those sounds in our language. But you can't have those in a good quality audiobook. And I should mention too, as we're heading kind of down this road, ACX, the Creators Exchange, it's just acx.com. Anyone, they're the 900-pound gorilla. That's Amazon Audible's site for books and that want narrators and narrators that want to do books. And it is just right now, if you're sitting at your computer, just open up a new window and just type in acx.com, go there, and then come back to it after I'm done talking, because you'll want to spend a lot of time there. They are really, really good. They offer an immense amount of tech support because you have to meet certain minimum standards in terms of like volumes and all that. And they don't just set the standards for the audiobooks. They also tell you how to meet those standards, because when you upload your files to ACX, they instantly review them. They didn't used to have this. It's a big, big deal. A couple of years ago, you would have to wait a week or so to see if your basement volume was at the appropriate level or not. And when you've done a lot of books, you know the numbers. But when I was starting out, I didn't know the numbers, and nobody really seemed to know the numbers. You would just get back this thing that says your basement volume's too low or whatever. They have requirements for how much dead air is at the beginning and end of each chapter. And all that stuff is in their tech support, how to narrate a book thing. And they also have a lot of performance support. They have a nice blog section where they tell people, they have some really top pros in the business, have written good essays and answer questions like, I want to accomplish XYZ with this work. How do I do it? Or a ton of stuff. And that's also where you go to find books that need narrators for auditioning. And when you go, after you practice a bit with your Audacity stuff and your microphone and your setup and all of that, you can go in there and just click on books looking for narrators, I think is the phrase, or producers, they call them. Books looking for producers, audiobook producers. And you can just skim through. Right now, I looked the other day, there were 1,700 books that are currently looking for narrators. Now, here's the thing. This is a pro tip that I can't stress enough. Don't do a book that you wouldn't read, or at least that you're not interested in the subject. Like, I'm certainly not going to read, a young adult basketball book, but I like the NBA and I like basketball. So doing a book that involved basketball was fun for me, even if it wasn't a book that I would normally read. But a lot of the books in Audible, in the Audible exchange and the ACX exchange are just crap. I mean, there's no other way to put it, because there's an immense amount of self-published books out there that are terrible. And I'm a writer, and I say that with some degree of sadness. But a lot of people, there's a reason why the gatekeepers in the publishing industry are there. And even if and I say this knowing some of your listeners, Joe knows this, for example, my first book that I published, it was turned down 71 times by agents and publishers and publishing company. On the 72nd time, I got a yes for my melanoma book. There's a reason why those gatekeepers are there. And so if you can't get past the gatekeepers, a lot of people self-publish it, and then they think, I'm going to have an audiobook made out of this. Well, the thing is, with ACX, you split the profits with the author or the publisher. Well, if the guy's only going to sell 17 books because it's lousy, and you get half of the, okay, so let's see, do the math. You're going to make $4 times 17. 17 is you're going to make 17 is 38. You're going to make $76. And if it's a 300-page book, it's going to take you many, many hours. Is that worth it? Absolutely.
No.
Don't be professional right from the get-go. Find books that are, and there's a really good set of filters at ACX too. You can filter if you want to do erotica. You can filter out everything but the erotica. If you don't want to,
I was about to ask I know that, especially on Audible, because I use Audible a lot. Audible has books that run the whole gamut of age guidelines, ratings, etc. If somebody is, not interested in doing erotica, they can filter those books out or filter them. Okay.
Yeah.
Because, there are some people who aren't going to be comfortable reading that, and there are other people who would be completely comfortable.
And would love it, and could probably make a decent living.
I was going to say, I'm guessing there's probably a pretty good market if you're willing to do that.
Right, and I'm not a value judger in this regard at all, because we've all looked at some of those sites, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It's human nature, but again, some people aren't going to be comfortable reading that out loud, and. From what you're describing, this isn't something, and one of the other things that you've talked about that was really surprising to me is that this is not something where you just sit down and narrate a 300-page book, like in one sitting. You're going to do this over the course of days and days.
Yes.
Like an hour here, 30 minutes there, and that type of thing.
It's difficult.
I would imagine if nothing else, your voice would get tired after a little while.
It does, and so does your affect as the reader. Your job. I'm losing my earbud here. I'm trying some different ones today with the little wraparound ear things, because I have weird shaped ear channels, and they're always falling out. And these are actually pretty comfortable. Your job is to take the author's book and bring it to life by your voice. That's the job. And you need to bring energy, whether it's a low-key energy, depends on the kind of book, right? Some books, like when I was talking about, Steph Curry shooting baskets, at Davidson, you got to be, you got to kind of be a little Dick Vitale in you. He's a diaper candy, baby.
Yeah.
Well, you got to, but you always have to have the appropriate energy level and affect. And, you got to pay attention. I mean, that's kind of rule number one for good audiobooks. If you've listened to books by good narrators, the readers are clearly paying attention to what they're reading because it sounds legit. It sounds credible. And you can't do that for a lengthy period of time. So I'll do like 40 minutes at a time, and then I'll go edit all my audio. And that might be it for the day for me, because I've got other kinds of projects. Right now I'm working on a novel, and I'm always pitching something to a magazine for freelance. And so it's plenty. And if you're an at-home parent, even more so. How often does I get the hiccups all of a sudden. How often does an at-home parent have much more time than that? No. So, in the morning, maybe you get the kids settled down, and maybe if in the summer, they're doing something, on their tablets or whatever, and you get 20 minutes. Hey kids, I'm going to the studio, I'm going to read a book for a little bit, and you come back in 20 minutes and you check on them and they're good and you're done. And then you can say, all right, well, I'm going to get my laptop out too, and you're going to edit your audio while they're, in the kitchen while you watch them make cookies or whatever, you got going on. And so it's, in a way, it's kind of a good good side hustle for a lot of at-home parents, moms and dads, for sure.
I mean, for me, for instance, next year, my youngest starts kindergarten. And that's going to mean that both of my kids are going to be at the same school, which means that from like 7:30 in the morning until 2:15 in the afternoon, I'm going to have a kid-free house. Now, granted, during that time, I still have to do laundry and dishes and cleaning and grocery shopping and all the 14 million other things.
You got to run the house.
But there will still be more time uninterrupted than there has been for the last 5-6 years.
Right. And that's perfect. Yeah, absolutely it is.
One thing that I'm really curious about, because I really am excited about trying to do this myself. When I was back in high school, I did a lot of theater. When I went to college for music and theater, which is how I ended up working in the food industry. Because, there's not a lot of jobs with that degree program.
Right.
But you talked about, like, getting started. So, like, I've got my equipment. I go on and you said it was the ATX?
C is in creator. Yeah.
Or ACX. C is in creator. Gotcha. Okay. ACX. So you go to the ACX.com. And on there will be a list of books that are looking for a narrator, a reader, whatever the term is, a producer.
Yes.
And once you find one that you're interested in, I assume that you click on it and you can, like, download a copy of that book or something?
Well, not a copy at first. They'll usually put up, like, maybe 1 or 2 graphs. And that's your audition piece. And then you will produce the highest quality audio that you can based on that, minute and a half audition piece that they give you, and you upload that. And there's some tricks, you have to convert the Audacity program to an MP3, and ACX will walk you right through how to do that, as will the Audacity owner's manual walks you right through how to take what they call their AUP, their Audacity program, to walk you right through the Audacity file, and you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's not, you click on export as, and it gives you your choice of how you want to export it, and you click on MP3, and Audacity does it all for you. I mean, this is
okay.
This is not complicated stuff. It looks complicated at first because there's so much, coming at you all at once, but it's, step by step by step is actually pretty simple. And then
it's just a matter of learning a new program.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll be honest. For those of you who are watching, if you go back on the National At Home Dad Network's YouTube page, we have all the recordings of all of the webinars that I've done over the last 2 years, with the exception of with the exception of the very first one, because I was too nervous and forgot to hit the record button. But everything from the second one on is there. And the other day I went back and watched some of the early ones, and man, I've learned a lot more about how to use the different video conferencing and streaming programs since then. So I could see where it's just a matter of learning the software.
It took me a couple of years, actually, to figure out my settings to where they, like in terms of the technical things in post-production. There's this thing called compression where you take the peaks and the valleys and you kind of bring them a little closer together. It's a more comfortable listening experience. Everybody uses it. This is not a trick. This is not everybody uses compression. Or the EQ, the equalization. There's all different ways to structure, and we all have it on our stereos, whether, where does the bass peak, and they have a bunch of presets in there. And it took me a really long time to find, for my voice and the kind of books that I often use, what are the best settings for somebody who's going to be listening on headphones and in earbuds. It's kind of a tricky thing because earbuds are not nearly so demanding as headphones are. So you got to find settings that work, because most people are listening on earbuds if they're not listening on Alexa, but you still have to be able to have a good product for people who are listening on headphones. Mm-hmm. And it took me literally 2 years before I could figure that out. Now, of course, they're all locked in. Got them stored in 2 different places, so I can't ever forget.
And I can say, as somebody who listens to a whole lot of audiobooks, we've all had an experience where I've had to fight my way through a couple of audiobooks where I loved the book and I loved the story and absolutely abjectly hated the narrator.
Sure. And I'm sure
the story was good enough that I would plow through it. But if they did a sequel with the same narrator, I wasn't going to do it.
Right. And I've heard both, actually. Boy, your narration was great, but that book sucked. And I don't read reviews, but somebody said, this review's hilarious, so I'm going to share this with you. I hope you don't mind. And they're like, what was that narrator's deal? It was, it was kind of funny and kind of snarky. And I was like, yeah, whatever. He bought the book, so I got paid.
Well, you're never going to be able to make everybody happy.
Of course not.
Absolutely not. And one thing that I learned working in the restaurant industry is that you can have 100 people come through your business and be completely satisfied, and they're not going to say a word, but the one person who had a bad experience is going to tell everybody they know on the planet. Yeah. Bad news travels way faster than good reviews.
It, though? Yeah, it does, for
now,
sure.
Once you submit that little minute and a half audition, what kind of turnaround time? Are you talking about,
Usually pretty fast, usually pretty quickly. I'll tell you 2 stories that kind of, in my experience, one of the books that I did was called Go Ask Your Father. This guy named Leonard Davis, Professor Leonard Davis, he's at the University of Chicago, Illinois. He's one of the world's leading authorities on disability. I knew of him because he's on NPR all the time talking about disability issues. And he had a book coming out, and I was like, and I didn't realize he was having a book coming out. I was just literally, just scrolling through ACX looking for a book that sounded interesting. I thought, Go Ask Your Father. This guy was one of the first sperm donor babies, but nobody told him. And so he was doing, because it was back in the early 50s or late 40s when he was born. And so that was not a thing that was talked about back then. And it turns out his wacky, goofy uncle Abe that he loved was actually his real father, because his dad was sterile. And Abe, who looked, we saw their pictures, and they actually sent me a hard copy of the book. Usually they either just send you a PDF or a Kindle / Nook or whatever. But they actually sent me an autographed hard copy. Nice. That doesn't always happen.
Nice.
Yeah. And so the book opens up with him at his dad's funeral, and he's Jewish, and so am I. And the second line of the book is the Jewish prayer for the dead, the Kaddish. And if you've ever been to a Jewish funeral, Vayikadal, Vayikada, Shemei Rabbah, and Jewish, and I know the words. And so I did the audition, chanting it in the centuries old chant. I got a message 10 minutes later after I submitted that audition. He said, as soon as I heard you chant those like the first 4 syllables of cottage, I looked at my agent and I said, that's the guy.
Okay.
And I have a terrific working relationship with Leonard. We've done some other stuff together, and he's very funny and very learned. And I was really honored that somebody at that level, because it was pretty early on in my voiceover, wanted me to do his book just strictly on that basis. And I wished I knew then what I knew now, because I would have created a slightly better product. But still, we've sold a bunch of them, so people like it. His book was great.
So
on the other hand,
stick with
sometimes
what
it
you
takes
know.
like a week. Right. You find a niche. But
Yeah.
I've also been like over a week. And now that I have this relationship with this McGann Publishing, I don't go on ACX nearly as much as I used to. But I audition frequently for like 3-4 books at a time. And I bat about 70%. About 70% of the auditions I get offers for, which is because, like you said, stick with what you know. I choose books that after I read them, A, I like them, so that shows up in the narration, and B, I choose books that I feel are a good match for my voice. I'm not a little kid. I'm not a 23-year-old guy who's reading a children's book in an excited voice, because that's not who I am anymore. And there were a couple times where like I accepted a job, and then I would say, well, okay, I'll do yours next. There's already one ahead of you in the queue. And then like a week later, this guy calls me. We had a little video chat. He says, I really want you to do this book that you auditioned for. And I'm like, well, dude, there's 2 ahead of you. So, it's going to be a month probably till I get to your project. Oh, no, I need to have this book done by next week.
Oh.
And I'm like, well, maybe you should have messaged me, right away rather than a week and a half later. And I said, and besides, you can't do an audiobook. You can't get that. It's like,
do they generally respond with rejections as well
Sure.
as offers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's always nice.
That was one of the big things that really annoyed me when I would be job hunting, is there was nothing worse than going out and interviewing for a job and then just never hearing anything back.
Right. For whatever reason, the ghosting phenomenon has not seemed to hit the audiobook industry yet. I'm sure it will, but normally, right now you just get a letter back that says, thanks for your audition. After careful consideration, we decided that your voice isn't right for this project. You're like, yeah, okay, cool.
Okay.
Doesn't bother me. I mean, I totally get that. What the author and, their agent and the publisher hear in their head wasn't my voice. And that's fine, because that's part of the gig.
And that makes complete sense. I mean, I'm a big fan of science fiction and fantasy novels. And as a result, I tend to read like long epic series where, you're dealing with 6, 8, 10 books in a series. And several of them now, a lot of these authors have begun like writing a series, and then before they put out the next big book, they'll throw out like a couple of novellas that take place between books.
Sure.
And I don't remember, I want to say it was the Expanse series on Audible, but one of the novellas, he couldn't get the same narrator that he's had for all of the other ones. And it was so off-putting to listen to that one. It was so different that it didn't feel like the same story.
There's a woman I'm friends with. Her name is Jodi Krangle, Krangle, and she is an awesome, exceptional voiceover artist. She doesn't do audiobook narration that as far as I know, but she's really terrific. And her thing is audio branding. And it's really important. Whether you're doing voiceover, I'm the voice of Little Caesars Pizza here in Genesee County, by the way.
Oh, okay.
You call Little Caesars, for example, to place an order. Thank you for calling Little Caesars of Genesee County. And audio branding is really important. There's a home improvement chain here in mid-Michigan where I live. I live in Flint. It's called Menards. And probably if you're a NASCAR fan, you've heard of Menards, of course, because that's them. And the guy's voice, I can't stand it. It's aggravating as all hell. Yeah, it's scratchy, it's high-pitched, but man, it's 100% identifiable. It's audio branding, and it's probably a stronger thing than logo branding because our brains really respond to smells and sounds in a way that our eyes don't always. You see that Coke logo, even didn't say Coke, you would know what it is. Well, if you heard this guy reading the Wall Street Journal, you would go, oh, that's the Menards guy. And if they ever change, well, they're going to. I mean, obviously, he's not going to live forever. But when they have to change, it's going to be really off-putting for a lot of Menards customers, because all of a sudden, this guy, it's going to be wrong. And that's kind of like this gig I have with McGann Publishing, that I'm their voice. And when people buy books from McGann, they kind of now expect that I'm the voice, and it's nice. I'm not I always have work.
Yeah.
And I like and I love the books that he produces. He writes some himself, and the ones he publishes. So it's really cool. And everybody in this business kind of does that after a while. You develop a relationship with certain publishing houses, and they want you to do their projects for them. And it's much nicer than having to constantly hustle to get a book that you think you can live with for a couple weeks, that isn't a subject that you can get excited about and bring some energy and some emotion to. And I should also mention this before we're here for an hour,
pretty
right?
Close.
Okay, I was looking at the clock down there. I got 11:46.
Yeah.
When you go to ACX and you start looking for things to audition that fit in your niche, and even if you don't know what your niche is, you'll know it when you look at the book and you read if it's a book that you would read, on your own, that's probably a book that you will do a good job narrating. Look to see how many copies of it they've sold. Look to check on the author's sales figures on Amazon. If they are ranked 1,467,219 in sales in whatever their categories are, don't do it. Don't do it. Now, granted, we would all love to do the book that's, number 17 or whatever. That doesn't happen either, because those are taken by aged, high-end, totally professional,
right,
kind of thing. But if the author is like number 7,000 in that category, that's not so bad, all things considered. And you're going to make some bucks because that book is going to sell. And they also know how to market the book, and that's a big part of the business as well.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah. And choose wisely, my friend. Choose wisely.
Well, I will ask one thing, and it's the the $100,000 question is, if you could go back right now and give yourself one piece of advice, the you who was just getting started doing audiobooks, what would be that piece of advice?
Chapstick. It's funny. That is that's my closing tip for nearly every, because I actually, as I mentioned to you while we were, before we went live, I have a presentation, it's PowerPoint and all that. I didn't want to do that with you, because you and I are friends for years now. Since DC, I think, and Dad 2 Summit. Yeah.
In the before times.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
That was actually the last thing, one of the last 3 things I did before COVID was Dad 2 in DC.
Yep. And so I didn't want to do a presentation. I just wanted to have a conversation with you about this, is that a lot of use chapstick, because our lips, especially when you've been talking for an hour, our lips stick together and they pop and they make funny scratching noises that a good mic picks up. So in my studio, I always have 2 chapsticks. And here's the funny part. Were you in San Antonio for Dad 2.0?
No.
I don't remember.
No.
Okay.
DC was the first time I ever went.
There was a vendor there who had bourbon flavored everything, and I picked up like a dozen bourbon flavored chapsticks from their company for my swag bag. And I have like 2 of them left, and they're downstairs in my studio. And before I start any kind of narration, whether it's a book or a voiceover, doing the chapstick, and it has eliminated a whole lot of headaches in terms of like post-production. The other thing, that's a good pro tip. The other thing I would say on a more serious note is buy gear as cheaply as you can. That's a little bit better than what you think you can afford. Don't skimp, but don't spend a lot of money. And right now, so many companies are coming out with whole packages for podcasting. And those podcasting packages are a great way because they're cutting the prices. They're getting solid gear in there that will serve you well. And you can get a nice set of headphones for those folks you can get a nice set of cans, a decent microphone, maybe even an audio interface, which you can go to like any company and investigate what the hell an audio interface is. It's a good tool, and they're inexpensive, $99 maybe, and they're selling them all at one. And you can get really solid gear now, and that was not the case when I started doing this 10 years ago. It was really, really kind of piecemeal. But the audiobook industry was on a roll before the pandemic. Sales were on their way up because we were spending so much time in our car, and people were really wanting to be able to listen to other things other than sports talk radio and music, and a lot of podcasts, obviously, and a lot of audiobooks since the pandemic. So buy better quality than you think you might want, and then grow into it, but don't spend a ton of money. And I really like those packages, like I said.
And I'm also sure that at this point there's probably a decent amount of those packages available used on some of the secondary marketplaces, whether it's Facebook Marketplace or eBay or whatever, because and again, this is not passing judgment on anybody, but I know a whole lot of people who, when the pandemic hit, everybody thought, I'm going to start a podcast.
Right.
And, for every person who did it and did a great job of it, like the Stay-at-Home Dad Beercast, there were like 5 people who recorded 2 episodes and went, oh, I can't do this.
Right. This is actually work.
They have a box of gear sitting next to their computer.
Yeah, I bet they do. That's absolutely true. I never even thought of it in that light, but you and I both know a bunch of guys who started podcasts, and they're like, this isn't as much fun as I thought. Cranking out quality content on a weekly basis is hard.
I've been doing this webinar series on a monthly basis for the last 2 years, and it's been work to do it, on a monthly basis. I mean, if nothing else, just finding the right guests that like have something that the stay-at-home dad community and parents in general would have an interest in isn't always the easiest thing.
Yeah. Look, I see we're kind of coming down to the end here. I see we're at 11:53 now. Let me throw out a couple things for anybody who's watching this, whether it's watching it later on YouTube or if you're on Facebook Live or whatever right now. I'm on Twitter at dstan58, and feel free, if you have whatever questions you have, follow me. We can DM. We can just talk about it right in the regular news feed or in the threads, whatever. If you are really interested in this and you've got the gear and or you have access to gear for a little bit, feel free to message me on Twitter, and I'll give you my email address, and you can send me like a 2-minute MP3. I'll be happy to listen and give you my opinion. I've heard what's the right way to say this? There are a lot of different voices that will be successful in this business that people will like to listen to. And sometimes it's you might think you don't have the voice, but maybe you do. It's really about clarity and transmitting emotion as much as it is about sounding like an FM DJ. That's really not necessarily the case for an audiobook, because audiobooks are about reading, and that's what it is at the core. You are sitting up in front of the class as the teacher in 2nd grade, reading the book to the kids, even if it's not a 2nd grade book. So feel free, like I said, message me on Twitter at dstan58, and we can set something up if you want to email me, or you just have further questions about the business, or whatever. I'm here to help. We're all, I don't know if we're all in this together, but we're all trying to get by.
There's no harm in helping folks out. And another bonus is, if any of you actually follow David on Twitter, the man writes incredible sonnets.
Oh, thank you.
And literally like true sonnets, and post them on the regular. So if you're a fan of poetry, it's worth following him just for that. Because there's not a lot of great poets out there in the world doing classic sonnets.
Namaste, my friend.
Well, on behalf of the National At-Home Dad Network, thank you so much for coming. I do want to remind everyone that the National At-Home Dad Network is a 501c3 nonprofit. We focus on providing advocacy, community education, and support for dads and families where dad is the primary caregiver. If you want to support us, please go to our website. It is athomedad.org. You can become a member, kind of like supporting NPR. We offer lifetime memberships. We throw a convention once a year, which is professional development for professional dads. It's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona, this coming fall, end of September, very, very beginning of October, over a weekend. And go to our YouTube page, check out the past webinars. There's also Home Dad Chat, which is a podcast featuring Brock Lush and Danny Mercer. They are doing the weekly grind on the podcast. And they do some fantastic stuff. But please check out the organization, and thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the National At-Home Dad Network, everybody have a great day, and hopefully you guys can record some books soon.